God reached his hand down from the sky. He flooded the land and he set it afire. He said, "Fear me again. Know I'm your father. Remember that no one can breathe underwater. So bend your knees and bow your heads. Save your babies. Here's your latest episode of Columbia House Party." Jake, what's up, man?
Were you doing like a voice audition for a show there? That was very spirited.
I'm just getting into the preacher vibe, you know? A lot of talk about Christianity today. I'm back to, I don't remember the name of any of the priests that I had when I was younger, but one of those guys from St. Andrew's Church or whatever. A reference our guest will understand a little bit more. I'm channeling my Big E Langston from early in his WWE run when he had some preacher vibes to his promos. No, I don't know. I just want to get biblical. This was, if we're being completely honest, it was inspired by Mac reading the Bible on Always Sunny, not anything actually religious. God's gonna give you some shoes.
Well, that's actually religious. It's just kind of wrong about it.
Yeah, you walk through fire, you get some shoes. There you go. That's clearly the takeaway on the religious commentary from today's album. It's certainly positive and restorative like that. Jake, what do you got for us?
So a band that I also think comparing to last week is appropriate because this is very much a time and place band and a time and place album for me personally. This album came out pretty much right when I moved to Montreal. And so the way I get to know cities when I first get there is I just go walking. So I spent the first 2 weeks I lived in Montreal walking around the city, listening to this album and this band. It's kind of my soundtrack. So today we are talking about one of the best punk adjacent albums of the 2000s, a quintessential George W. Bush era album, and an extremely important one for me. Today we're talking about an album and a band that, as by their own admission, are hardly art, but hardly garbage. Today, we are talking about The Body, the Blood, the Machine by the Thermals.
God reached his hand down from the sky. He flooded the land, then he set it afire. He said, "Fear me again. No, I'm your father. Remember that no one can breathe underwater." Bend your knees and bow your heads. Save your babies, here's your future. Yeah, here's your future. God reached his hand down from the sky. God asked Noah if he wanted to die. He said, "No, sir. Oh, no, sir." God said, "Here's your future. Gonna rain." So we're packing our things, we're building a boat, we're gonna create the new master race, cause we're so pure. Oh Lord, we're so pure. So here's your future. Here's your future. So here's your future. So here's your future. So here's your future. So here's your future.
All right, that song was Here's Your Future by the Thermals, or as the typo in my notes says, the Thermales.
Thermales.
We are joined today by a guest for this episode, and this guest actually introduced me to the Thermales. We are joined by my other podcast co-host for a podcast co-host fight where Jake and Eric Koreen will compete for my love and the position of my favorite co-host. Eric, what's up, man?
Not too much. I assume Jake is going to win just because he probably puts in more, effort and like planning effort into you laugh, but you should see how little I do for Raptors Reasons.
Look, Jake, even the episodes of this podcast where you're like, well, I don't even know this band, this is a Blake episode, you are still doing more than Eric does for the Raptors Reasonableness, where basically he comes on and I ask him questions, and that's pretty much it.
I was actually going to offer for our recording today to plan it out, but then I was writing this feature, and I was too mad. I was too mad about it to offer to help you. So maybe in another few weeks.
It's fine. Eric Koreen at The Athletic Toronto covering the Raptors. He's also the co-host of Raptors Reasonableness. You can follow him at eKoreen. You also may know him from, if you are a music fan and a fan of this podcast, or follower of this podcast on Twitter, Eric put together the, how did you frame it, 90s Can Rock bracket early in the pandemic?
Oh yeah.
That was, it was March, definitely, because it was meant to replace March Madness, which did not happen. And the tragically have predictably ran away with it. I am a hip fan, so, not disappointed, but it was a fun little distraction for a few weeks there.
I have to think that I believe Serial Joe lost the play-in that tournament. Is that correct?
I can't say for sure. That does sound correct. It sounds correct in both ways, both factually correct and the correct choice was made. Yes.
Be interesting to go back and see just how many of those albums we've done at this point, because we have done a few. Eric, one of the things that you are good at, I guess, other than Raptors coverage, is you have good music takes. But the other thing is your hair. You keep it in good shape, even though it's not the most manageable hair. And what I want to ask you, because this was an issue before we came on the air, you're also married. You also have pets. Does your comb belong exclusively to you, and do you have a special comb for your type of hair?
I pretty much don't use a comb, and except if I want to puff it out to give the ultimate Jufro type situation as a gag. But mostly I just, use I have curly hair for those who don't know. And I, shower, use curly hair shampoo and conditioner, give it a little quick dry, but not completely dry, and then just let it dry as is. I don't often use a comb, so I cannot help in this fight. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll just have to assume that Jake is wrong then.
I'm not participating in this.
Move forward.
Yeah. Well, when I do use a comb, I guess I do use my wife's comb.
Thank you.
If that helps.
All right. I'm going to pivot us to music. Okay. So Eric is on to talk about The Body, the Blood, the Machine by the Thermals. Eric, you have, I would say your music taste overlaps more closely with Jake's, even though you and I obviously have some bands that we have in common. You have been, over the life of Columbia House Party, you've brought up the podcast a couple times and made it known you wanted to come on. The Thermals, to me, are a very Koreen band, not only because they are one of the official bands of NBA Twitter from the looks of it, searching my timeline, but also because you introduced me to them. Somehow they were off my radar until maybe 2014. Part of that is because at the time that albums like The Body, the Blood, the Machine were coming out, I was still very much in the pop punk and emo scenes. And then I had my kind of multi-year dalliance being more of a hip-hop person. So I missed a lot of the kind of early mid-2000s, the really good indie rock stuff. And the Thermals obviously qualify. So first, thank you, Eric, for putting me onto the Thermals, because they have become one of my kind of go back or retrospective favorite bands to go back and listen to. And thank you for coming on and doing this episode of the podcast. Why the Thermals for you? You gave us basically the list you sent of albums you might want to do was basically had 5 of the 10 albums highest on our to-do list. So a lot of ways we could have gone with this, but why do the Thermals stick out for you?
Well, I mean, if you ever do an episode on the Wrens, the Meadowlands, and don't have me on, you better be having somebody from the actual band on, or else I'm going to be very upset. That's the only, and they might come on. Anyway, I don't need to get into this. The Thermals came, probably like Jake, I heard this album right when it came out, but I hadn't been into quote unquote indie rock for that long. I mean, in high school in suburban, Thornhill, Ontario, I certainly didn't have a pipeline into independent music. I was sort of listening to a lot of, mainstream rock. And then I got, like you, Blake, I got into hip hop. I remember right before I started getting into indie rock, like one of the most common albums in my Discman, yes, that's a Discman, was College Dropout. So that would have been like 2004. And then I met my friend, we're still friends, Nick, at the Ryerson University. And he was, and went on to be a music writer, but was big into, just knew lots of music and introduced me to lots of stuff, a lot of older indie. So that's how I came to really love bands like Built to Spill, for one, is a band that I wouldn't have known with him, Guided by Voices. I barely knew the Pixies then. So I spent a lot of sort of 2005 going back and listening to 90s and early 2000s indie classics. And then probably by about 2006, I started I had heard what I needed to hear, and then I started paying attention to new albums. And I remember the Thermals, when it came out, The Body, the Blood, and the Machine. I hadn't listened to them before, really. And it was just so damn catchy. And, I would drive down to Ryerson sometimes in my mother's Toyota Corolla. And this was definitely pumping in the awesome stereo of the Corolla. It's just, it's a 35-minute record, if that. And while I certainly think side one is the more immediate and catchy side than side two, it's like a quick listen. You don't, there's nothing you really need to skip. And that's, even though some of my favorite albums of all time, I would say, are more labyrinths, and go all over the place. Those are sort of the exceptions to the rule for me. Like, I love a 10-song album in which you don't have to skip a song, and this was just like a shot of pure energy. And I wasn't even that political at the time. Like, now I identify with it more than I did then.
Yeah, can certainly see that on the political identification aspect. For me, going back to this, like I said, Eric, you kind of introduced me to this band. I had somehow missed them. For me, I really like, as someone who was raised or who went to Catholic school all the way through the end of high school, but wasn't raised in like a very Catholic home. Like, we didn't go to church or anything like that. The reflections on religion and the way that religion, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about this, the thin line between religion and the way people use religion to justify a lot of bad things is very interesting to me. Jake, you kind of teed us up with your connections earlier, so we're going to let you talk about those as you guide us through The Body, the Blood, the Machine after this. All right, Jake, take us away. Give us the quick background on the Thermals and get us to The Body, the Blood, the Machine. Not, as I said before the break, the Bloody, the Blood, the Machine. A lot of mistakes for me. The Bloody, the Thermales. Thank goodness this is a Jake-led episode, so take it away, man. Please take this off my hands.
Okay, very quick background before we get into this album. Thermals were formed in 2002 by Hutch Harris and Kathy Foster, both of whom were formerly of the folk group Hutch and Kathy, which is a very creative name. The group originally consisted of Harris, Foster, drummer Jordan Hudson of M. Ward's band, and Ben Barnett on guitar. They began as more of a Hutch Harris solo effort, as he wrote and recorded the band's first album, More Parts Per Million, by himself, and then recorded it also by himself in the kitchen of his one-bedroom house in Portland, Oregon in 2002. The record label Sub Pop was then turned on to the album by none other than our old friend of the show, Ben Gibbard, who sent them along a copy, and Sub Pop signed the band to a 3-album deal within the first 6 months of the band existing. More Parts Per Million was reportedly recorded for only $60, and sort of, perhaps unfairly, but perhaps not, established them as sort of a lo-fi sounding band, kind of like the Mountain Goats' early work, and that label was kind of stuck with them for the rest of their career, even though only this album is really kind of the lo-fi one. I would say that More Parts Per Million is sort of kind of features a thesis statement for the band as a whole, and that song is this one, No Culture Icons.
Hardly art, hardly starving. Hardly art, hardly garbage. Hardly art, hardly starving. Hardly art, hardly garbage. More colored liquid, no scent, no skin. More stained paper, more parts per million. No new depthness, no self-reference. No cults and no false stands. No one ideal, no one I feel. No to the same, no two with the same name. Hardly art, hardly starving. Hardly art, hardly garbage. Hardly art, hardly starving. Hardly art, hardly garbage. More colored liquid, no scent, no skin. More stained paper, more parts per million. No new depthness, no self-reference. No getting psyched on, no culture icons. No one ideal, no what I feel. No to the same name, two with the same name. Eyes so deep, you never see through. I can't fucking stop thinking about you.
That song rules.
It does. I don't know about you, Eric, but I got into this album way after I sort of got into the other first two. Because
this was what, 2003? So that would have,
yeah.
This and I mean, even fucking A would have been like tight for you guys based on the timelines you just laid out, right?
Yeah, I was definitely put off by like the lo-fi-ness of it for a while, and then I went back. I was like, oh wait, this is actually really good.
Yeah, this was pre when I would have been aware of it, and so this is an album I came back to, and I certainly like parts of it, but I still often have trouble with lo-fi records. So there are so like No Culture Icons is like undeniable, and that chorus is just chef's kiss, but that's just a hard sound for me to listen to for even 30 or 35 minutes.
Yeah, fair enough. After the release of More Parts Per Million, Ben Barnett would leave the band, leaving them as a three-piece, which would be their most consistent lineup configuration throughout their existence. Hutch Harris would take over on guitar when Barnett left, so he was singing and playing guitar. 2004, they would release their second album, Fucking A, produced by CHP mainstay Chris Walla. The title was not exactly a great commercial endeavor in 2004, when everyone was still kind of worried about these things. Hutch Harris told Punk News in 2007 that, I have to say, they, being the label, were good sports about releasing a record called Fucking A, in spite of the fact that the title couldn't be mentioned on the radio or in print for the most part. We couldn't have cared less. We gave no quarter and expected and received none in return. Fucking A is notable, I think, linking to Body the Blood, which in that there is a promo pressing of a single that was never released from this record. The song's God and Country. And it's one of my favorite Thermals songs. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is because The Body is a pretty political record, as we're going to get into. But up until this point, I wouldn't say the Thermals were a particularly political band. And then when you're listening to Fucking A, all of a sudden, halfway through the record, comes a song about wishing for the assassination of the president. And I think it was an interesting choice that was sort of what they wanted to be the single also, which props to them for that.
Yeah, they really weren't rolling out the how to be successful playbook with this album title and that single choice.
Yeah, no, I listened to your podcast on the Walkman the other day on Bows and Arrows. And you referred to them as sort of a band that shot itself in the foot and sort of made pains not to be successful. No, like that's an example of taking pains to not be successful. Like this is how you do it. I mean, in a very obvious, unsubtle way. But this is like, shit, we're not succeeding on any level except, holding true to our beliefs. And I not so rosy-eyed to think it was that pure or anything like that. But there are better ways to make it than naming your second album Fucking A and talking about the assassination of the president, even if you only realistically expect college radio to be playing your songs.
Yes, I think that is very true. Following the touring cycle of Fucking A, Hudson would leave the band, leaving the group without a drummer. The Thermals, for a band that only existed for like 15 years, have quite a few lineup shifts, especially because 2/3 of the band was consistent, and then the drummer was just kind of in and out, which we see a lot, actually, which is weird. Anyway, for The Body, The Blood, The Machine, they actually recorded this album as a duo, with Kathy Foster handling all of the drum work, so a one-woman rhythm section, which is pretty cool. The Body, The Blood Machine was recorded and produced by Fugazi's drummer, coincidentally enough, Brandon Canty, who didn't end up playing drums on the record, sadly. Harris told Punk News regarding working with someone of Canty's stature, "It was very intimidating. He used to kick the drums over and shout at us, 'What the fuck are you doing? You suck. Don't you know who the fuck you're working with here? I'm fucking Brendan Canty. I was in Rites of Spring, bitch.' He drank about 14 Red Bulls a day and was quite irritable. No, just kidding. He was a real sweetheart. We just saw him in DC. He came to our show. Brendan's the best. Kathy and I seriously love him to death. He brought major energy and enthusiasm. We couldn't have asked for more, but then we did, and he gave it to us." The Body is another CHP staple in that it is a concept album about a, quote, young couple who must flee a United States governed by fascist faux Christians. If we're going track by track, which I don't know if we'll do it for every track, but we'll start there. The album opens with the song we heard off the top of today's episode, Here's Your Future, an all-time album opener, in my opinion. It sets up the themes of the record. It's a great song. It establishes the Body's God as a vengeful God, which I think is important. And if we're sticking with the cinematic theatrical concept album, I would say that this is a fantastic overture, as it were.
To me, like, this isn't part of the story of the album, but it is a great introduction. And I think the key line in the whole song, it's God talking to Noah and Noah talking back, we're going to create a new master race because we're so pure. Oh, Lord, we're so pure. Like, in case you didn't know, this was a very, cynical look on what's happened to religion. I think "'cause we're so pure, oh Lord, we're so pure," and just the way he says it with that faux confidence and cockiness almost, like they're taking some shots here.
For sure. And I think, just to take it back to this being a concept album, is it a concept album or is it just like this is reality, like fascist faux Christian ruling? I know it wasn't necessarily at the time of 2006, but like we have just lived this album the last couple of years, really, especially when you get into some of the other songs later that talk about, that hint at body autonomy or justification for evil. And obviously, there's the Bush element with respect to the war that I'm sure we're going to talk about with a song in a second. But yeah, the Christian right is real, and yeah, I don't know. So it's a concept album, but it feels less and less like a concept album over time.
The couple in real life just would have moved to Canada in 2016. Yes. They would have been in like a New Yorker article as the lead.
Yes, they would have been retweeting Bruce Arthur's tweets and then about Canada and then coming up here.
I'm glad you mentioned the parallels though, because we are going to talk about that because it has come up. This album is sort of back in conversation, or was back in conversation a couple years ago about that. Regarding Here's Your Future, though, Harris has said it's his favorite song on the album, and he said it goes so many places, and it changes a lot for such a short song. Kathy and I didn't demo a ton for the record. A lot of what's on the record just kind of came out while we were in the studio with Brendan. A lot of great stuff we came up with on the spot, so that when we mixed, we were kind of surprised and pleased at what had happened, and Here's Your Future is definitely a song like that. Regarding the band's sort of, I wouldn't, maybe outside of God and Country, I guess, a harsh veer into the political, Harris told Punk News, "A greedy, warmongering U.S. government that exists only to serve the Christian right and its fanatical ideals. Did anything in particular inspire that? I'll give you two guesses, and the first two don't count." He would later expand on this in 2007, talking to the Center for American Progress, saying, "To me, there's no way you can discuss American politics these days without pointing to the connection with organized religion, particularly the Christian right. Bush answers to the people who prop him up. The rest of the world can apparently go to hell. I grew up Christian. I went to church every Sunday and attended Catholic and Jesuit schools growing up. I actually played an active role in my Christian youth group in high school. I went to church camp to Tijuana to build houses for homeless families living in tents. I found so many positive things in Christianity, but eventually the hypocrisy of organized religion and my own lack of faith led me to abandon the church. I do not believe in God, but honestly, I wish I did." And I think that the ideas and the themes and all these things, that big ideas that Hutch Harris is talking about, is best articulated on this record by actually a song skipping quite ahead to side B here, but is articulated by what I think is the best song in this record, Power Doesn't Run on Nothing.
Just a child, we are just a child. We are wide awake, but our legs are shaky. We're unaware, we're hyper as we stare into space with grins on our faces. So give us what we're asking for, 'cause God is with us and our God's the richest. Our power doesn't run on nothing, it runs on blood, and blood is easy to obtain when you have no shame.
Two shameful admissions here to make before we get back to the album. First, apologies to Eric. In my notes, I realized that while you pushed me to the Thermals, I had actually heard Here's Your Future on Weeds and remember liking the song. And when I went back to it, I was like, oh yeah, that band. Wow. Yeah. The second is that I once captioned a picture of, I forget the specifics, but I was out with Thomas Drance and we were eating something, and the caption was "Power Doesn't Run on Nothing." And now in reflection, that could not have been a worse caption that missed the point more. And I probably shouldn't have brought that up and mentioned it, but if we're not going to be self-deprecating here, look, Bush can't be the only one taking shots here. Anyway, I'm an idiot. Continue, Jake.
So anyway, I just wanted to talk about this song because I think it's probably the best song they ever wrote. Feel free to disagree, but I think that the lyric in this line that really sort of drives home what I think a predominant feeling of, I hesitate to say the left because it was more mainstream then, but sort of the anti-Bush, anti-Christian right crowd was saying back then, is the line, "So give us what we're asking for, because either way we're going to take it. Our power doesn't run on nothing. We need the land you're standing on, so let's go move it. And they'll give us what we're asking for because God is with us and our God's the richest." And I just love how he writes about this stuff in this song. And it's so much, like, as much as I love and idolize and enjoy sort of the directness of a propagandy song, I really like what Harris does with this song and how he sort of, it's so mean and sarcastic, and I love it.
Yeah, and I think it does a good job kind of taking you inside the insidiousness of the way these people think, right? That, our God's the richest. And it's like, it's not, they don't think in those literal terms, but they do think that on top of the money aspect, the religious aspect of these wars are justified. And it's, the other thing I like about this song too is while it's clearly about Bush and the war for oil, I think it could just as easily transplant to a song about like the Canadian treatment of Indigenous people or even like the Dakota pipelines or anything like that. Like, it's a really, as specific as it is, it's a really translatable song across a lot of issues with like governmental capitalism and just, borderline fascism in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think given when it was released, if you were just seeing like the first 8 songs as part of a story that wasn't related to the time, this song disabuses you of that notion, right? And it's a lot of the lyrics that Jake, you just read, and I'm sure you've read this quote, and I hope I'm not spoiling it, because it's from that same Center of American Progress interview. He said it, Hutch Harris said in writing it, "I was picturing Dick Cheney writing those lyrics himself."
There you go.
And I also picked up, he's saying at some point there's a lyric, "We're more equal," and not to get all literary, but from Orwell, who's another sort of factor throughout this album. There's a reference to Big Brother. I think in Animal Farm, one of the rules becomes everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. When the leaders, I think they were pigs. Do you guys remember your Animal Farm? My wife says, yeah, from the other room. When the pigs, the leaders, decide that they actually, in this, communist, world, they actually need some advantages over the people who they are supposed to be serving. Just musically, the outro to this song, again, just like so almost, just so propulsive, I guess is the word I'd use, and a really great counter to the fury that's the lyrical content.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up the outro, because I think it sort of highlights one of the things that I love so much about this band, in that so much of their music is so simple, yet it's so effective. Like the outro of this song is really it's a very simple guitar line over just like a driving rhythm section, and that's it. But it works. I mean,
it's a 2-person band at this point, right?
Yeah, but it works so well, and they always did so much with such little instrumentation. And like, Harris talking about how a lot of these songs were just kind of the demos, and I think even on Fucking A, there's like one guitar overdub on the whole record, and it's just like, this is what it is. And they kind of did that always, and I love it. I think it's great.
How are they as a live band? Have either of you guys seen
Awesome.
them live? Because I have not. So this holds up that extra layer of kind of, I guess they tour with more than 2 people to make that possible. But
yeah, there are 3. I've seen them twice or 3 times. They were a 3-piece every time that I saw them.
I saw them once at the Horseshoe, and what was most memorable about that is that was the first time I got a burrito from Big Fat Burrito that day. It was great. Maybe not the best pre-concert food, probably a better.
Oh, you got that pre-concert.
That's your first mistake.
Oh, yeah, buddy, well, you probably just like you were probably sweating guac by the end of that show in the Horseshoe.
That was a hot show too. I remember that one.
Yeah, I want to say it was in the summer. I want to say it was like the Horseshoe in August or something.
I was going to say, it doesn't matter at the Horseshoe anyway. It would have been
it was a hot,
in there no matter
what. It was a hot show.
Yeah.
So regarding all of the politics and things, in a noisy Rank Your Records article in which Hutch Harris ranked The Body first on their discography, he said, "This came out in 2006, so we were writing it right after George Bush had been reelected. It was a dark, scary time. I wanted to say something about it, but politics and music can be simple and dumb. So what we were looking to do was, okay, who's actually propping up politicians, and where does all that money come from? And in that case, a lot of support and money was coming from the religious right. It's not a revolutionary record. It's a record about trying to escape." Which brings us to our next song, which I believe was the lead single from the record. I know there's a music video for it.
Yeah.
I would say this is sort of the, if you know a Thermals song, this is probably the one you know. Maybe one from the next record.
Just an all-time video.
Yeah, a great video. This song is filled to the brim with biblical references and biblical sounds, and that song is A Pillar of Salt.
We're special, sir. We know everybody is. We built too many walls. Yeah, we built too many walls. And now we gotta run.
by the way, has been stuck in my head for like 3 days leading into this podcast. So thanks, guys. Great video. Also, Eric, to you, I think this is not even just me assuming it, because the chord progressions are kind of the same across the two songs. But do you guys, Pillar of Salt and Returning to the Fold, that's kind of a 1-2, like that's kind of a couple.
They are literally exactly the same chords.
Yeah, and I would say also, certainly lyrically, like A Pillar of Salt is about them escaping or attempting to escape, and
Sodom,
returning
right?
I think Sodom is used more as a reference point, like they're trying to escape whatever this fictitious America, I assume it's America, America, I don't think is specifically mentioned in the lyrics. And now we gotta run. A giant fist is out to crush us. So they're not making any. They're not hiding it. And then Returning to the Fold, which is actually probably my favorite song on the record. I don't want to get too ahead of your plan here with this album, but it's definitely a reflection on what they have just done. So musically, they sound the same, but it's almost a call and response lyrically as well.
Yeah, I remember finding that very cool when I was 18, that they were like literally the exact same chord structure, just with a different tune and back to back and all that. This song also has obviously I was going to say famous, but this song isn't big enough to be famous, but the very recognizable keyboard line in the beginning, that was sort of intentional along with the themes of the record. Hutch Harris said that it was a line I heard in my head while Kathy and I were writing. I knew it would be best executed on a keyboard. The studio where we recorded The Body, the Blood, the Machine, called Supernatural Sound Studios, ironically records mostly Christian rock. So they had a classic church organ, and it was way too perfect, and we had to use it. The title, as Blake sort of alluded to, is a reference to Lot's wife, who turned back to look at Sodom and was turned into a pillar of salt. Eric, you were kind of talking earlier about how you don't consider Here's Your Future to be part of the story. I agree. I've always seen this song and Returning to the Fold as sort of the beginning of the story. And I think from what I've could glean the internet, that's not an unpopular idea. Writing for the AV Club in 2018, Danette Chavez said, it introduces the couple will follow for the rest of the album. That's one that, per the Thermal's own description, are fleeing a fascist regime. They don't want to have to deny their dirty bodies, so they stick to the ground on their way to Canada, the ever-popular destination for dissidents. And sort of because it's a narrative punk album, the question of whether or not they're going to American Idiotize this album and turn it into a musical came up in an interview with Consequence of Sound, where Hutch Harris was asked about this, and he said, no one's sending us emails about wanting to make The Body, the Blood, the Machine into a musical, but I would love to see a film based on the record or based on this new record. I don't want to do it myself because it's too much work, but I love the idea of it. I think the new record and The Body, the Blood, the Machine, they both would lend themselves very well to a fleshed out story using those songs.
Eric, you have a bit of a Green Day / Thermals take too, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, just as this album is concerned, and it was mentioned, I believe, in the Pitchfork review that American Idiot was brought up, so it's not like a wholly original take. But, I mean, the Thermals I think they've covered Green Day before, and this album sort of sounds like if Green Day tried to do American Idiot when they were in their Dookie phase. Like, if they didn't want to make a fucking rock opera, and instead were just like trying to get a very clear point across, and were maybe a bit more tied into their punk roots, and still prioritized 2.5 or 3 minute songs instead of 9-minute 5-part songs. I think it's maybe what this, and like I like parts of American Idiot. I'm not trying to criticize it too much, but this is the more immediate listen, I would say, and I think that's always just sort of made sense to me, because really, as progressive and left-leaning as the indie music scene was, there weren't a lot of explicit songs or albums about what was going on from a lot of these bands. And this really it certainly in hindsight, as as I said earlier, I wasn't necessarily thinking about this at the time, but in hindsight, this is one of the only albums in the kind of the indie canon from that time that directly takes what's going on to task.
Yeah, I think that sort of this Bush era was interesting for music sort of speaking out against. It was kind of, I think this is right in the height of like I guess, at least for white liberals, I suppose, sort of like the Daily Show-ification of political opinion. I don't necessarily mean that as a negative, because I think it made a lot of people, including myself, aware of this kind of stuff. But it was also the era of like the Dixie Chicks criticizing Bush and having their career put on hold for a decade. And like, there was obviously like political punk bands who were writing songs about this stuff. And I'm sure tons of other artists that I didn't listen to when I was 18 writing songs and stuff. But yeah, in the like sort of, I don't know, let's call it the pitchfork crowd. It wasn't, I think, quite as common. Or if it was written about, it was like alluded to rather than direct.
Yeah, like I love Spoon and the New Pornographers, but they were releasing political screeds,
Yeah.
And the Thermals are, they're not them. They have a bit more of a punk adjacent sound, as you put it. But again, this wasn't being done with the other music I was listening to. So it really stands out in that way to me.
And unfortunately, as a little segue into our next topic, this album has sort of had a revival in the last couple years because nothing has changed and everything's still bad and Republicans are still
Things have gotten worse, Jake.
That's true. In an article for Uproxx, Alex Galbraith wrote, "Elements of Trump's America are all over this album once you start looking for them. Where Trump supporters get ravenous at the idea of a wall, the future American people gleefully shout, 'Good luck getting over the fence,' via a sneering Harris. Trump's bullying rhetoric is parroted by subordinates saying things like, 'Give us what we're asking for, either way we're going to take it, and we need the ground you're standing on.' This also is highlighted in a lyric from the song 'An Ear for Baby' that goes, 'Draw the bridges, dig the ditches deep, we're gonna need a new border. Get thyself in line for your reassignment for the new first world order,' which is a great line and also parallels. And Hutch Harris has actually written about this himself in articles for the Talkhouse. He said that, 'I'm not happy with the fact the lyrics sound like they were written this year and by Trump himself.' And to me, this all sort of reads like those jokes about The Simpsons predicting Trump. And there's that great tweet about how The Simpsons didn't predict anything. It's just things haven't improved since 1989. And I feel like, while I absolutely see sort of the resonance of this album in the Trump era, to me, it just highlights that, like, it's just Republicans. And that's just what it is.
Yeah, like Hutch Harris was doing an experiment about where this could ultimately lead. Like he went to like a logical extreme kind of. And then the Republicans just kept going in that direction. Like it's not like it wasn't this wild like note for note prediction. It's just like, I think again, and it's why it's so important this album is about the Christian right. Its thesis, or not its thesis, but what it suggests is governments are, beholden to the groups that empower them. And he and a lot of other people were smart enough to see like the voting base, not only the voting base, but the money they got from the religious right. And that's who ultimately determine the agendas of your country. So, that's how capitalistic governments often work most of the time if there aren't, proper checks and balances. And so often there are not.
And this is, the end of the album kind of takes it to that place. And Eric, you mentioned, he tried to push it to what the logical extreme would look like. And it builds to a pretty good album closer called I Hold the Sound.
The light out, we don't talk. The light out, we sleep now. The door locked, we don't talk. We sleep now.
I wanted to talk about I Hold the Sound because I think it's important to the message of the album, which, like, by Harris's own admission was, as you kind of pointed out, Eric, was like written with what's the worst it could get, was kind of how they looked at writing this album. But I find it really interesting that the album closes with this song that I've always found to be very hopeful despite everything, and about sort of how, despite the religious right and Republicans and the right and all that, like, there is sort of this notion, it's like, it sounds cheesy as hell, but I've always taken this song to be like, we followed this couple this whole album and they find sort of solace and hope in each other. And I think that's sort of something that is a great place to leave off on this album. There's an great article in 2016 by Judy Berman in Pitchfork called After the Election with the Julie Ruin and the Thermals, which is about sort of the first two shows she went to after Trump was elected. One being the Julie Ruin, which is, of course, Kathleen Hanna's amazing band, and the other being the Thermals. And Judy Berman writes, art can only counterbalance suffering by propelling those of us who have the autonomy to act past hopelessness. Albums like The Body, the Blood, the Machine are reasons to live, not die. This is from a different article about this album and about that article by Julie Berman. It says, just as Berman writes about not giving up, the Thermals are not giving in either. Recently, the band donated a large portion of show profits to Planned Parenthood and encouraged fans to donate as well. This counterbalance to negativity and refusal to give in to hopelessness is part of why there's power in this album. The songs collected on The Body can and ought to be used as fuel to remind listeners why they need to fight against the government's seemingly rapid descent into maddening bigotry and corporate conflict of interest. In a piece for Watt, Harris expressed a similar view about the power of music, saying they can evoke the most powerful emotions inside us at times when we feel brittle and broken. They can be cleansing at times when we feel we will never be clean again. Most importantly, songs are absolutely unbreakable. They are powerful tools that we will continue to use in a never-ending battle against fascism. And I just think that song sort of represents that, for me, anyway.
And boy, is the battle sure never ending. All right, we're going to talk about how more ways this album was received, as well as where the Thermals went from here after this. All right, Jake, so The Body, the Blood, the Machine was album 3 of 7 for the Thermals. Obviously, the fact that they continued on for 4 more albums suggests that it was at least a moderate success. Where'd they go from here, and how did people respond to The Body, the Blood, the Machine back in 2006?
Extremely well. This is one of the better received albums in the time it was released that we've talked about. Contemporary reviews included an A from AV Club, 4.5 out of 5 from Consequence of Sound, an A- from MSN Music, which is a very dated reference, an 8 out of 10 from NME, 8.5 from Pitchfork, 8 out of 10 from Pop Matters, and a 4 out of 5 from Spin. Pitchfork also named it the 186th best album of the 2000s.
That's where I had it too.
It was very distinguishable from the 187th.
Yeah, no, and the 185, like there's there's a clear.
It doesn't hold a candle to it.
Yeah, it's a mark of delineation that's clear to all.
The album is well regarded within the band as well. As I said, Harris ranked it as his favorite Thermals record in Ranking Records, and it has dominated their set lists over the next decade. According to Setlist FM, their top 3 most played songs are all from this album, being Here's Your Future, Pillar of Salt, and Returning to the Fold. And they've played, like, on their, like, song tracker, they've played songs from this album like 200 more times than their album. They would follow this up with Now We Can See in 2009 on Kill Rock Stars. Kathy Foster, once again, the entire rhythm section on this record. It's not a direct concept album quite like this one, but there is a lyrical through line. The band says it's a collection of songs from when we were alive. Some of this is literal, as there's a song called We Were Alive on it, and it also opens with a song called When I Died. I don't know about you guys, but I've always looked at this album very literally as just sort of reflections. Like, it starts off with When I Died, so it's about someone dying, and the rest of the album is reflections of a dead person. They also had another single and a music video from this album, which is a song I know Eric wanted to talk about, and that is the title track called Now We Can See.
So Eric, what is it about, I mean, that album paired with The Body, the Blood, the Machine for you, but also that song in particular?
Well, I mean, the album, again, like thematically just about death, and, you know, again, Jake said it wasn't a concept album, and that's right, but, you know, certainly reflecting a lot on what it means to be alive and how irrevocable a lot of this stuff is. But I think what's interesting to me about that song, other than it rules, is we spent so much of the time talking about The Body, the Blood, the Machine for its lyrical content, and rightly so. I mean, that is what makes it most notable. But it doesn't work unless there are like hooks upon hooks upon hooks. And that intro to the song that's repeated throughout, like, they write some catchy pop songs, and that might not be the first thing you think of when you think of the Thermals, but I think that Now We Can See the song is the Thermals at their poppiest and their most digestible, but I don't mean that as a backhanded compliment. Like, it's truly great, and they would go on to sort of lean into that, I think, a bit more on their album Personal Life, but to me, this is the best pure pop song they ever wrote.
No arguments here.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Jake, where do they go from here? And then we got to rank some songs.
After Now We Can See, Weston Glass joined the band on drums and would stick with them as a drummer for the rest of their tenure. They released Personal Life in 2010, which is my vote for the most underrated Thermals album. They released Desperate Ground in 2013, sort of a return to the lo-fi roots. And then We Disappear in 2016. On April 9th, 2018, the band announced that they were officially disbanding. And Hutch Harris has since sort of dabbled in some comedy, a little bit of acting, and released his debut solo album, Only Water, in November 2018.
Yeah, so I will say that one of the more interesting things about reflecting on the Thermals and reading about them a little bit, you know, coming back to them way after the fact, first is that they played Sam Sutherland's Weird Basement Show talk show night in 2012, and they were really good. And the other thing is that the influence that they've had, as much as they're like a punky indie rock band, it's kind of all over the more, like, I guess what you'd classify as emo or Midwest emo now, like Oso Oso and Into It Over It both list the Thermals as like one of their hugest influences. And you don't really hear that in the music, but you can hear it in kind of the approach, I think. And I think it's just, it speaks to kind of the Thermals being like a band's band, where like they are one of Rosenstock's favorite bands too. And they're, you know, they're kind of just, a band everyone seems to, everyone who cares a lot about this kind of music seems to really care about. Dan Ozee called them the most reliable band in indie rock when they broke up, and I think he said they had the highest batting average across albums of any band from this scene, which, again, no arguments here. So we've got to talk. Also, Hutch Harris having The Body, the Blood, the Machine at number 1 in his rank an album thing is maybe the first time I've agreed with someone ranking their own albums on this podcast.
I think just to very quickly touch on what you meant about them being a band's band. I think that they remind me, like, not musically at all, but they remind me a lot of Spoon in the sense that, like, they were extremely consistent to an absurd degree, and they have such incredible pop sensibilities while writing in their own style that everything just ends up like their floor is so high, is how I would consider them, where like even the worst Thermal song is better than most like pop punk adjacent music. And like the Thermals were just so fucking good. And I was really bummed when they called it quits, personally.
It's interesting that you mentioned Spoon. I personally think Spoon's a bit more consistent, but you're mentioning like two of my favorite bands of that era. And they both come from like sort of this creative partnership between duos. And it's Britt, Daniel, and Jim Eno with Spoon, and then Hutch and Kathy, who I can't believe we got through this whole podcast without saying they dated for a time. But yeah, it happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's none of my business.
Well, I mean, but I don't know. You talk about emo like all the time on this podcast.
I know.
I thought you would want to get into their not so tortured backstory.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly just like incredible that you can kind of, and like a real level of maturity to still be able to work together through that and stuff.
I once saw the Rosebuds play a show in Washington, D.C., and they were also, I mean, they were a married couple for a while, and they got divorced, wrote a whole album together about the divorce, basically, and I saw them after the next record, which seemed to me to be about the main dude falling in love again. But she's still there. And just like, maybe I was just like bringing all this to the show, but she just seemed pissed off and not enjoying herself the whole show while he's like smiling
Fleetwood
and
Mac
grinning.
Playbook.
Yeah, except like, again, another band that's like, yeah, there are other people in at least the touring band, but it's more or less we're talking about two people as the creative engine behind it. And it's just, I can't imagine. That's not for me. Not for me.
I will say, just speaking to the power of good duos, being toward the end of this podcast with the two people that I make up duos with, it can be a productive duo with a good friend, can really get your creative juices going. And anyway, we got to rank some songs off of The Body, the Blood, the Machine. Eric will give you first dibs here at a top 3 or top however many you want to list.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to 4 just because I have 4 that I remember when I did skip through on occasion this album. These were the 4 I stuck with. What do you want, 1 to 4 or 4 to 1?
1 to 4. Let's start at the top.
Okay, so yeah, number 1 would be Returning to the Fold. And we didn't get too much into it, but and I won't belabor all of these, but I really like the element of him questioning his decision and to escape, and the couple's decision to escape a bit in there. And I think that makes what's an unsubtle record a bit deeper and really grapples more with how much it takes to leave something you've become used to behind. So that's not why. I just think that's the song that always stuck with me the most, but I think it's really important to making the album a bit stronger as a concept. 2, I'll go Here's Your Future. 3, A Pillar of Salt. And 4, we didn't talk about it at all, St. Rosa and the Swallows.
Yeah, great hook on that one. Jake, what do you got for us at the top?
I have Power Doesn't Run on Nothing at 1. Like I said, it's probably my favorite Thermal song, and I definitely think it's lyrically it is very directly on the nose, but I appreciate that about it, and I love it. I have Here's Your Future at number 2, and I Hold the Sound at number 3.
All right. I have Here's Your Future 1, Pillar of Salt 2, and Power Doesn't Run on Nothing 3. So this is not helpful in terms of determining one song to pick out for the mixtape. Eric, as you know, on this pod, we try to either, sometimes pick the guest's favorite song or the song that best represents kind of the conversation around the album. We're in a bit of a weird spot here where I think I leaned toward Pillar of Salt initially, and Eric, it's in both of our top threes, and it's one of the more better known Thermal songs. But Jake's point about Power Doesn't Run on Nothing being kind of the most lasting of the statements that the album makes is a relevant one. So Eric, I'm gonna give you the floor here. What do you think should make the mixtape?
I'd rather go on a bit of a poppier note. Of those two choices, I would go with Pillar of Salt. We're making a mixtape here. You want to feel the energy a little bit, and you want to feel the good vibes. Not that there's anything super positive about this album's lyrical content, except for maybe I Hold the Sound, as you pointed out, and Test Pattern. But this one, I think it's gonna be a banger on the mixtape. I'd go with that.
So, Jake, as long as you don't have any objections, a Pillar of Salt is going on the mixtape.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Is that you objecting, throwing stuff on the floor over there?
No, it's just my wife throwing cutlery around our kitchen.
Unbelievable. It's not a comb she's throwing around?
No, the comb's been put in its place for me to use it later. Don't worry.
All right, now that we have selected a song for the mixtape, we'd also like to thank producer Dylan, which, if this podcast is coming into your podcast feed at a reasonable length, he did a great job today, because we ran a little long on this one. Apologies for that, Dill, but thank you for all your great work. And we would like to thank Eric Koreen. And you can also follow Eric at eKoreen for Raptors and music takes, and just takes in general. Let the takes fly, man.
Yeah, just trying to get out my feelings without getting fired. That's the constant balance that we walk. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks for coming on, man. It was overdue, and sorry it took as long as it did.
Please try the fish.